Hello, and welcome to Mind and Money Show, where we talk all things mindset, money management, and our entrepreneurial journey. Along the way, we're going to throw in some amazing guests for good measure. I'm Shane Hyland.
I'm Gareth Shears. This show is going to change your life and teach you skills that school never taught you.
Boom.
David, how are you?
I'm very well, Gareth. Thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Superb to see you and hear you, Mr. Horne.
Absolutely. And you, my friend.
Thank you.
How's things going?
Yeah, good. It's been busy. There's been a lot of interest in the this new recovery loan scheme. So I've had a few people reaching out about that. And just working on a number of big projects for clients. Plus, we had yesterday our Q2 funding focus event where we actually ran two events, one in the morning to be time friendly for people in Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and one in the afternoon to be time friendly for people in North America, as well as obviously sort of EMEA for both.
How exhausted were you yesterday evening?
I was pretty tired after dinner. I mean, it was those events themselves, in and of themselves aren't exhausting, but you kind of feel emotionally drained when they're over.
Yeah.
So it was, two events of an hour and a half each. So yeah, pretty tired.
But there was good weather. There was a back garden. There was a glass or two that was breathing for an hour or two in advance, and you chilled out yesterday evening, I'd imagine.
I certainly did. We had dinner outside.
Oh, that's the nice thing of this time of year and dinner outside. We did the same yesterday. That's one thing I do like. It's actually a bit cooler outside and inside at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is good. But yeah, you seem a busy guy, and actually looking at your resume, it's a very impressive resume actually. As I kind of scroll through it, but I won't kind of get into it. I'll let you tell us that. So, okay. Tell us a bit about your journey.
Okay,
David,
cool.
From where it all really began, I guess.
It all began on the west coast of Canada, which explains my funny accent.
Snap. So at least now, David, there's two of us that have funny accents on this one.
So I was born in Vancouver, grew up on the west coast, and trained as a chartered accountant with PwC, and then just after I qualified, I got an opportunity to transfer with PwC to their Zurich office. I'm a fluent German speaker, and so I had expressed interest in transferring to a German-speaking office. And so my wife and I moved in the summer of 1987. We'd only been married a couple of years, so we sort of sold off what few possessions we had, packed our clothes into 4 suitcases, got on board an airplane with a 2-year employment contract and one-way tickets. And that was 34 years ago.
Wow.
So we ended up staying in Switzerland for 6 years, 2 years with PwC, and then I got a job offer from my biggest client, a company called NCR, which was a big computer company that was in the process of being bought out by the US telecoms giant AT&T. And I ended up spending 8 years in total with NCR/AT&T, 4 years in Switzerland, and then we had an opportunity to move to the UK. My dad was born here, so I have dual citizenship. My wife was actually born here. Her family immigrated to Canada when she was small, so she has dual citizenship. And so the opportunity to come to London was a great one, and we've been here since '93.
Wow.
And I guess then, so 8 years all in with AT&T, then I spent 3 years with the BBC, which was an interesting role, but I decided after the 3 years that the BBC and I were probably not best suited for each other. Looks good on the CV, but there you go. And then between 2000 and 2010, I was the CFO of 3 very different companies that all had one thing in common. So the first one was a PR agency. The second one was a digital media and publishing group that was listed on AIM. And the third one was a online auctioneer of used industrial equipment that was also listed on AIM. But the thing that the three companies had together, it had in common, was that they all raised money and bought companies. And so between 2000 and 2010, not by any great plan or anything, but just because of how I happened to land in these three different roles, I became a bit of an expert in fundraising and M&A. And then I left the auction business at the end of 2010. I'd had a bit of a burnout after the financial crisis. We had done a huge global acquisition. We'd raised 28 million pounds and bought out our largest global competitor. The whole thing was built up on the basis that we were going to be able to put the two companies together and rip out a ton of costs. So we did that. I flew all over the world for about a year. I racked up about 1 million miles on my BA account. And we came back to the markets and said we had done everything that we said we would. We'd ripped out the costs. Everything was on track. And a week later, Lehman Brothers went bust. And the whole fallout from the financial crisis came. In the fourth quarter of that year, 6 million pounds of revenue that we had expected just didn't happen. Wow. And having just done a huge global restructure, 6 million pounds fell all the way to the bottom line. So after the fourth profits warning, the chief exec got fired. It wasn't his fault, but somebody had to go. And the board brought in a new chief exec, and he and I didn't get on. And so I stuck around for a year, made sure the company was on a sound footing, and then left. And had my midlife crisis moment. I launched a wine business, which was tremendous fun, but not very successful financially, and certainly not anything that I would recommend anything to anyone who's thinking of branching out into the world of entrepreneurship. But it was great fun. And I still have the wine business today. I'm its largest customer by some measure. As my best friend puts it, it's a tax-effective way to enjoy my hobby.
Do you know, every time somebody mentions Lehman Brothers, my boy's into the Minions films at the moment, and when the guy is going to get funding, it's appropriate when we're talking about this, he goes to the Bank of Evil. And when he's walking in, it says the Bank of Evil, formerly Lehman Brothers. It's absolutely superb.
Yep.
If I can start, usually I'll say to people what motivates you and chat about that. But if I may start first, 34 years ago, what was the motivation to not only go to a different country, but basically fly the other side of the world and start from nothing? Because that's a big leap.
A very good friend of mine describes me as an explorer of people, places, and possibilities. So I'll use that as the overriding thing. So when I was a kid growing up in Canada, we had a couple of family holidays to Europe. One when I was 12, and I came and we flew into London, and I fell in love with London. And then we were traveling around the continent. We were in France, Germany, Switzerland, and Holland. And I was fascinated, but frustrated. I was fascinated because everything was so different. You know, the architecture was different. The way people dressed was different. The clothing was different. The food was different. But I was frustrated because I couldn't communicate. Okay. And so then we went back to Canada, and in Canada, it's compulsory to learn French if you're in the English-speaking part. And so I started to do French in school and really enjoyed it. And having been to France, could kind of picture it as opposed to just sort of the textbook stuff. And then in my second year of high school, I had the opportunity to learn German, and I absolutely loved German. And so then a couple of years later, after I'd done 3 years of French and 2 years of German at school, we came back as a family, and my older brother and sister came as well. And it was interesting because I'm 8 years younger than my brother and 10 years younger than the older sister. But I had been to Europe before, and I spoke languages and they didn't. So I was 15 at the time, and they were in their early 20s. And it was like, I was the one who did all the communicating. I was the one who did, ordering food in restaurants or bars or whatever. And that just opened my eyes to a new world. And I remember saying when I was 15 in Europe, I remember saying, one day I'm going to live here. And 10 years later, we moved to Switzerland.
Wow. I presume you could order the beer for them as well, being, 25 and 23, I think. at the time.
Yep.
So
we just kept quiet about my age.
I think the French are okay with that age. I'm not sure about the Germans.
Well, the French, I think their drinking laws were a lot lower, weren't they? I don't know what they kind of are now. Because I remember when we were over in France on a school tour, you were able to drink.
Yeah, I don't know, no idea. But yeah, I was. Let's just say I was able to order drinks for my sister and brother, and usually for myself too.
So, the motivation was to get over this side of the water, and 34 years later, still remain.
I'm a massive Europhile.
What is the motivation now? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What motivates you, to do things?
What motivates me today? I think the biggest thing that motivates me today is I've kind of, after a long time trying to figure out what is it that I do, I've finally figured out what I want to be when I grow up, which at nearly 59 years old isn't too bad.
Well, they've changed the old, as they had it here, the old age pension, because it's now called the state pension, because old age is now classed in the mid-80s. So you're still only young.
Exactly.
You can have, because you've straddled two generations of, they've increased the old age. You can have a second midlife crisis if you want.
I think my wife might have a problem with that one. So.
Does that involve motorbikes then as well?
Yeah.
I'd love to touch on reading the resume here. I'd give you a job, but I just want to. I'd love to know about the wine business. Come on, you touched on it earlier, but
yep.
What? Go back to motivation. What was the motivation for doing it? Was it just I know about wine, so I'm going to run it, and then you become the chief sampler, or?
So wine has been and it's interesting. My parents weren't wine drinkers, but we moved house when I was 14, and one of our neighbors imported German wine into Canada, and I remember one day I was 14 or 15, and we were having a family Sunday lunch, and my dad opened this bottle of wine that he got from this lady who imported German wine. And he opened it up and he was pouring it around. There's my mom and dad and 4 kids. I'm the youngest. So he poured it around the 6 of us. By the time dad sat down, the whole room smelled like an alpine meadow. And I just thought, wow, this is incredible. And then, as I got older, I started tasting wine, but I couldn't really afford it. And then when we moved to Europe, and by then I was qualified, so I was making reasonable money. And living in Switzerland, you've got Germany, you've got France, you've got Italy. We won't talk about Austrian wine because that was the time they got in trouble with antifreeze. But all of a sudden I was surrounded by wine, and I just loved it, and started reading about it and learning about it. And then when my boss got fired after the 4th profits warning, I thought, and I realized I'm not here for long. I thought, okay, what do I really want to do? And I spent a lot of time thinking, and I boiled it down to my 2 great passions in life at that time were wine and music. And my daughters, who were at that time teenagers, looked at me and said, "Dad, you're too old for the music business, but wine would be perfect." So I went to night school and got my wine trade qualifications, and made trips to Bordeaux and started talking with people and all that jazz, and thought, oh, this will be a piece of cake. And everybody said, no, it's a really tough game. And I thought, no, I'll come in with a new idea and it'll be fine. And it's a really tough industry.
So was the wine as in buying and selling to Joe Public, or was it more the investment of it and leaving it for many years?
A bit of both. Not so much to Joe Public. What I actually wanted to do initially was source wine and sell it to all of my contacts in the city. The problem is all of my contacts in the city knew me as a CFO, not as some guy who was trying to flog wine. And all of a sudden I come along and said, oh, hi, it's David. I'm now a wine merchant. It's like, what? And I did manage to sell a few cases of wine to some of my friends in the city, and that was fine. But it never took off to the level that I could see it working. And then the accountant in me sat down and worked out what were the margins on wine, and they're pretty thin. And then I started to realize how much effort was involved to sell a case of wine, and it just got to the point where actually it wasn't worth it.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
basically just keep it yourself.
That's business though, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I kind of think like there's a saying I've heard recently: it's not failure, it's feedback.
Completely. No, and you know, I'm a much stronger person as a result of that experience.
Yeah.
And you know, I can sit down with someone who's struggling in business and say, I get where you're coming from. You know, I don't know how I'm going to make payroll, or I don't know how I'm going to pay the VAT this quarter, or I don't know how I'm going to pay the rent. I've been there.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's an interesting point there, because you obviously made a decision to go, I'm not doing this anymore. I've got to change direction. I've got to go back into probably what I know and I know is profitable and so on and so forth. But it's interesting that
what I'm known for.
Yeah, many business owners don't know when to stop, do they? And sometimes you've got to know when to hold and when to fold them, haven't you?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think for me it was a less difficult decision because I was branching into an industry that I'd never worked in before. I had never sold anything before. I sure learned a lot about that really fast. But you know, I think for most entrepreneurs, if they're doing something where they do have knowledge and it's not working, you know, if you seek the potential of light at the end of the tunnel, keep going.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing for me was you know, brand new industry and never sold anything before.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. Like over the years, I've had a lot of people kind of come to me. Like, I've run various businesses. Some have been successful, some haven't, and but I've got quite a bit of experience from when I was younger in the kind of pubs, restaurant trade. And I've had a few people come to me saying, I'm going to open a coffee shop. I'm going to open it here and do this. And I'm like, it won't work there because of competitors. Have you done your research? Don't remortgage your house and stick all your money into it. So they remortgage their house, stick all their money into it. 6 months later, it fails. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, and because they never came from that industry, and it, you know, certain industries, professions, like the pub trade is, you are a slave to it. I ran pubs and restaurants for 6 years, and when I was younger, and if someone doesn't call in for work, you've got to start work. You've got to get downstairs. If it's your day off, you've got to go and run it. You've got to go and cook in the kitchen. You've got to do all the stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I'd do it again. I'd have a pub or restaurant or bar now again, but I'd never, ever run it. It would just be there as a bit of an investment.
Right. Yep.
I think that comes down to is knowing your industry.
And if they work well, they can be very profitable.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
But they can also suck a hell of a lot.
Was there a toughness needed, David, to give that up and kind of admit, I don't know if defeat is the correct word, but to kind of say, this is not for me, or it's not working. I want to go back to doing what I'm really, really good at.
So I actually went into a period of very deep denial for about a year.
Okay.
I was swallowing rather than tasting the wine when I was at wine tastings. So I was drinking a lot. I was smoking quite a bit of weed and just kind of numbing myself because I didn't want to accept the realities that were there in front of me.
Yeah.
And then I got a major kick up the ass just after I turned 50. My parents had been here for my 50th birthday, which was great fun. And 3 weeks later, my dad had an accident and didn't survive. And you know, that was a tragically sad moment in life, but it was also the kick in the ass that I needed.
Yeah. So during those times in the previous podcast we done which was, you know, during the COVID period, there was a lot of, you know, how you know, resilience or mental strength and stuff like that. During that year, I'm sure there was going to be many dark days, tough times, and did you at that period, and even to today, have to put on a mask and show the rest of the world that you were okay, and when inside you weren't? How did you deal with those bad days?
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I even put on a mask to my family, to my wife and kids, and just said, oh, it'll be fine. Oh yeah, it's all good. And then all of a sudden, I can't remember what happened one time. And my wife said, or someone was talking, we were talking with some friends, that's right. And they said, oh, let's the four of us go away to Switzerland together. You guys can show us around. And I kind of started making funny noises and later on, my wife said, what was that all about? You would have loved that. And I said, I don't think we can afford to go to Switzerland. And that was kind of one of those moments where all of a sudden the realization was there, because basically the wine business had sucked all the money for 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
So
one of the things I was going to ask is, in terms of, people enjoying their lifestyle, and do they know their numbers? What was it a thing that, I know through your previous roles, you do work with numbers and that, did you know your numbers, and do you know your numbers going forward? And was that, you mentioned about the year out, was it the numbers that made you realize I need to get my act together, or what made that happen or change?
That's a good question. So back then, I mean, I had been able to negotiate an exit package from the PLC. So I had a reserve of cash. And when that ran out, that was one of the big wake up moments. But the bigger one was more my dad dying. And I think at that time I had phenomenal plans about how the wine business was going to be amazing, and it was going to become this huge global thing, and it just reality hit. In terms of today, I've got my numbers, but I'm actually quite committed to carrying on. I don't intend to retire. So my dad finally retired at 83. He died when he was 85. I've set myself 2 life goals. One is that I want to live to be at least 101 so that my wife and I can celebrate our 80th wedding anniversary. And the other is that once I've got my number and I know what it is, and that will mean that my family's fine, and it'll give my daughters money to put on, to pay a decent deposit on a house, I intend to keep working and give it all away.
So it is more so, your numbers, and it is knowing the lifestyle that you want to enjoy. And it's not people that, my feeling is people that continue working later into their life are not doing it for the sake of just having the money. They're doing it because they enjoy what they do.
Yeah, definitely 100%. So very much doing it because I enjoy what I do. And equally, and I'm committed to 2 of the UN global goals. Number 4, which is quality education, and number 5, which is gender equality. And I just feel, I've had lucky breaks in life, and as a result of that, if I know that my family's looked after and I'm well and healthy and can carry on doing stuff, I'm very happy to give it all away.
Yeah. But it's going back to, as you said, your numbers, you want to continue doing what you enjoy. The money is irrelevant to you because you know exactly what's being catered for, and you can have a really happy existence lifestyle without worrying about this money needs to come in. It is more so that the lifestyle and enjoying life rather than earning. Yeah.
And I don't have an overly extravagant lifestyle. I don't aspire to have a yacht or a jet or anything like that. We've lived in the same house in London for 28 years. It's paid off. So there's no mortgage, which is nice. The kids are grown up and off the payroll, so that's nice. So,
they're never off the payroll. It's like the mafia. Once you're in. There's no out. Never off the payroll.
That is true. That's my biggest worry in life. Is they're never off the payroll. That numbers. It's a big thing that we talk about, and no doubt probably something you talk about with the business owners you come across, David.
Yep.
And we've kind of find this. I'm interested to see your point of view for it, because you come in from a different perspective than we do with business owners. How often is it that when you sit with a business owner, they actually know the numbers?
Rare. It's rare. They'll have a big target. So I've got one guy that I work with, and he says, he's building this digital platform and he intends to take on Facebook. And I love his ambition. He wants 2 billion customers, and I think that's phenomenal. but equally, I always have to pepper that with a dose of reality from time to time. And he knows I do that, and we have a good, strong relationship, so we can do that. But no, so many entrepreneurs go into what they do because they know something really well, or they spot a gap in the market, or whatever the reason is, and they just go hell for leather with that. When I look at a business, and I set this out in my book as well, but when I look at a business, my argument is that while every business is different, every business is also the same. Every business has to find and win customers. That's called sales and marketing. Every business has to deliver whatever it is that they do to customers. That's called operations. And every business has to collect and pay cash, and that's called finance. And so every business has to have those three functions. I go into so many companies where sales and marketing is pretty good, operations is sometimes good, sometimes not so good, and finance is crap. They've found some cheap outsourced bookkeeper who does the accounts, and then when they submit the accounts to the accountant, they overpay that because the accountant spends time fixing it and getting it right, and they haven't really got a clue about what's going on. They know how much cash is in the bank and think that's how they run their business, and that's a good way to start, but you need to know so much more, and going in and understanding, well, where is the revenue coming from? And I might have three really big customers, but two of them suck the life out of the organization and we don't make any money, and the other one we do make money on, and they don't know that.
Yeah.
Do you think that people go from potentially being employed to entrepreneurs or setting their own business up for a specific reason? Sometimes that they want to spend more time with family, or they want a better lifestyle, and that company then, if it becomes successful, it takes over their life, and the reason that they set it up is the exact opposite that is happening, and they
100%.
They get engrossed in that, and the idea then of the business is their life, and when they want to retire, they can just sell the business, and I'll come on to that in a second. But you mentioned a big point earlier that we talk about, of you have a decent lifestyle. It's not an exaggerated lifestyle, and I think business owners don't understand. You need a big number for a big lifestyle, but you only need a small number for a small lifestyle. And you have to know what lifestyle you want to enjoy to know when you can get out. And I think a lot of people and big business owners have this idea that their business is worth more than they sometimes think. And it's almost like selling a house. It's just, I can put it on the market and it'll be sold tomorrow and I can retire into the sunset. But we know that, especially, when you deal with it, how long do you actually need to start getting things in order to make your exit strategy?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways, because there's actually two kinds of business, and the one that's harder is the kind of solopreneur type thing, where the business revolves around one person. They might have an assistant and they might have a bookkeeper, but literally the business is the person.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to buy that company.
Yeah.
When they decide they're done, they pack up shop and, sell off the furniture, and that's it. There is nothing you can buy because it's all one person. But assuming you're talking about businesses where the owner has built something up so that there's a team of people and there's, it's not wholly dependent on them. If it's a typical business, I would say it takes 2 to 3 years to get it in shape to maximize the value.
And most people think that can be done a lot shorter.
That's not necessarily 2 to 3 years of like, every day we've got to be on this, but it's like, you got to get certain things in place. Have you got contracts for everything? Have you got contracts with all of your customers? Have you got contracts with all of your staff? Do you know where they are? Can you pull them together? Can you prepare financial analyses of what's happened over this 3-year period? Because when a buyer comes in, the first thing, if there's an agreement that a deal is going to go forward and the high level terms have been agreed, the first detailed thing that then happens is called due diligence. And that's where, and again, this was what I learned between, I've bought or sold 24 companies now. Due diligence is typically where the buyer engages their accountants and lawyers to come in and crawl all over everything. with a view that if there are any skeletons, we're going to find them. And so you've got to be ready for that. And if there are skeletons, you've got to know how to deal with them. And in fact, I always advise people, as you move closer down towards getting a deal and getting due diligence, if you've got some skeletons, you need to start gradually disclosing that, because the worst thing that could happen is someone says, yeah, that's great, I love your business and I'll buy it for 10 million quid. And all of a sudden they come in, and on day 2, the lawyers come back and say, somebody's threatening to sue them for 50 million.
Coming back to sole entrepreneurs, and I spoke to many over the kind of years, they have this kind of idea that the business is worth, and I kind of get it. They offer a service which has value. I get that. But I always ask them this question: if we took you out of the business for 60 days, and I mean we put you in the middle of a rainforest with no mobile phone, could that business survive?
Yeah, that's a great question. And
the answer is no.
The answer in the vast majority of entrepreneurial businesses today is no. I've come across a few where the answer is yes. I have a friend who runs a very successful business. When he and I first met, he was in the process of hiring a managing director because he'd built it to a certain size and wanted someone to come in and just take over the day-to-day running for him to focus on the strategic stuff. Once he got that managing director on board, he and his wife went on a trip around the world for 3 months.
Yeah.
Nice. And he just thought, I've hired, and he spent probably a year hiring this MD. So he said, I've hired the best MD I could find. So I'm just going to get out of the way and let him get on with it.
Yeah.
But not many people.
Sometimes I scale that down a bit then. And they're like, oh, 60 days is a long time. I was like, okay, let's take you out for 3 weeks then. What does that look like? You want a 3-week holiday somewhere? What does that look like? Yeah. Is your phone ringing? Are you being badgered for X, Y, and Z? Yeah, I am. Yeah, continuously. Okay. Yeah. So the business doesn't run without you. So it doesn't have a value in my eyes.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's the difficult conversation with people, isn't it? Because they're the people that were working 16, 17 hours a day in the business. They are the business, and it is valued at something, but realistically it's not.
But if they understand and accept that, with planning over the next 2 to 3 years, all of the things can be done in order to make it a saleable business. Yeah. Makes but, and again, this is often the hardest one. The biggest element that gets in the way of that is the owner not letting go.
This has never happened before. This has never, ever happened in the 40 odd episodes we have done. It's never happened. You just did it again.
And we got a clean leased line as well into it. I get that it is hard to kind of let go. I'm pretty good at letting go of things and that ability to kind of delegate it out and allow other people to do it. Some things not so much. Yeah. But I think that is a big thing. Like you said, I think that's one of the big things is that letting go.
It is. I always make reference to that wonderful quote from Steve Jobs, who says, we hire people who are smarter than we are, bring them in and get them to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
And if you, and I totally understand if you've been the founder of a business and you've grown it and scaled it up to, 5 million in turnover. Look, it's come off your back and you've got it there. But if all of a sudden you're finding, okay, well, we're just doing 5 million turnover all the time, you're now the blockage. You're now the one that's holding the business back from going to the next step. And I've worked with a number of companies through these kinds of things, and sometimes it's a big challenge on the founder to bring in people who are smarter than they are. And I've seen, I can think of one particular company where we said, look, in order to grow, you need to bring in a really, really good sales director. And at first the founder wasn't wanting to do that because he'd been the guy who did all the sales. And it probably took him 18 months to get used to the fact that there was actually someone in the business who knew more about selling. And once the new sales guy was really starting to motor along and deliver, that was when he let go. But for 12 to 18 months, it was a major confrontation between the two of them. And there were times when the sales guy threatened to just leave. He just, forget it. This isn't what I joined for.
And I presume if you bring in some people, it allows you to step back a bit and makes you enjoy more of your lifestyle. Potentially then the company can grow. It gives you potentially more financial freedom, and it also gives you the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want, without the fear of ever running out of money, and have a really, really good life for the family, friends, and loved ones that you want to share these experiences with.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's the kind of paradox that's involved here. And I've seen this in companies where if I take this one particular company, and I worked with the founders there for 6 and a bit years. And at first, when we were talking about, okay, let's look at bringing in some sales resource, we were bringing in people on sort of 24K, 30K. And it just, it wasn't working out because they were junior salespeople and all that. And not just there, but in operations as well. For the longest time, we had an operations manager in that company who was, he was a decent bloke, but he'd hit his own personal glass ceiling. And the company was growing to the point where it was actually causing problems, because this particular person, and super guy, really, really lovely chap, decent fellow, had a heart of gold, and his desire was to help. But the company had grown to a level where he wasn't able to figure out what needed to be done. And so we needed to replace him with much more senior people that were much more expensive. And, when you're used to paying 20, 30 grand, and all of a sudden you're saying, well, we're going to bring in someone and they're going to be on 75. It's like, but actually the person who's on 75 is the person that can help you grow your business from 5 million to 25 million.
Yeah. I can understand why that scares people though.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Because we've brought people into the business before on at different kind of stages, and they haven't worked out. Do you know what I mean? And kind of and all right, yeah, it costs us a bit, and we kick ourselves now. But
hopefully you learn from the process, and what were the things that we missed in the hiring. And one of the mantras that I love that I learned from one of my mentors was hire slowly and fire quickly. Yeah. So if it's not working, okay, give them a chance, give them you've got to go through the warnings, processes, and improvements. Oh, yeah. But don't keep hanging on thinking, gosh, one day it'll be great when this person works out. If it's not working out, be done. It's better for both of you. And the other thing, when you have a team of people, all of the other employees know, and then when it's finally done, they'll look at you and go, what took you so long?
Yeah. Been there.
And the vast majority of this stuff that we're chatting about is in the book.
Yes.
Which is now on #1 bestseller on Amazon.
Indeed.
Just before we move on to the next question, I guess, couple of tips for business owners looking to scale, I guess.
Couple of tips for business owners looking to scale. Think outside the box. If you've built a business that's turning over at least a couple of million, you have the ability to raise money. And when you raise money, you can invest. You can either buy other companies, or you can invest in people, or you can invest in kit that will enable you to scale way, way faster than if you just think, well, I've got this organic growth and I've only got a little bit of cash to reinvest. If you truly want to scale, then once you've hit that kind of threshold, look seriously at raising capital in order to accelerate the scaling. Because there's a case study in the book. This was the first AIM-listed company I worked with. It was a publishing and digital media group. When I joined, turnover was 1.1 million. 3 years later, when I left, turnover was 27.7 million. We tripled the company every year for 3 years.
Nice. That's good. And that's scale.
Yeah.
And you've got to bring the right people in to scale your business, haven't you?
Definitely. Yeah. No, I mean, when I joined, so there was the founder, and then I came in, and I was the first CFO the company had ever had. Bless him, he calls me a co-founder, which I think is really sweet. But I don't make that claim. But if he ever says it, I don't refute it. So at first, he and I were the only exec directors. As a listed PLC, we had non-execs as well. But as we scaled the company, we brought in additional executive directors to take on certain roles. And I mean, we ended up doing it geographically because we were expanding into different countries. But you need to bolster your team as you're growing. And that might be through, hopefully you can do that through promoting people from within who are showing that they're capable. But don't be afraid to bring people in from outside.
Superb. I love that. So what's next, David, for you?
What's next for me? Well, so 2 years ago, I was speaking at an event about fundraising for SMEs, and a woman came up after my talk and asked me why so little venture capital funding went to female entrepreneurs. And being a middle-aged white guy, I had no idea this was an issue, and started doing some research into it. Came across, I mean, actually, it was interesting. A week after that event, I had a meeting with the chief executive of the British Business Bank. She and I had met at a function at the IOD previously, and we had this appointment in the diary to just catch up. And so I went and we had a lovely conversation. And towards the end, I asked her if she knew anything about this issue of funding for female entrepreneurs. And she smiled and reached down into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a research report that the bank had just published called UK VC and Female Founders. And they had looked at every venture capital deal in 2017 in the UK. All female founding teams submitted 5% of the pitch decks and got less than 1% of the money. Wow. Mixed gender teams submitted 20% of the decks and got 10% of the money. And all male teams had submitted 75% of the decks and got more than 89% of the money. So there's clearly a mismatch.
Yeah.
And so I started doing more research, and then I was having a coffee with a friend of mine who works at the London Stock Exchange from my PLC days. And we were chatting, and all of a sudden it hit me. I remember doing presentations in the theater at the Stock Exchange. And I said to her, look, if I put on an event, will you host it here? And will the Stock Exchange be a sponsor so that we can have the venue? And after a little bit of haggling, she agreed. And so we held an event in November of 2019. We had over 100 people show up, and it was showcasing at the time female entrepreneurs who had successfully raised money. So we had someone who'd raised angel funds, someone who'd raised VC money, someone who'd raised private equity, and someone who was the director of a company that had done an IPO on the stock exchange. And we also had a panel of 3 female investors giving their perspectives, and that went really well. And then we were talking about doing more. And then COVID hit, and we had to rejig our plans. But we ran another event online a year later in November last year, and we had an audience reaching as far as San Francisco in the west, the Philippines in the east, and Cape Town to the south. So we're starting to tap into something, and we've now run 4 events. We've got 2 more planned this year, but with very little spend on marketing. I've tapped into an audience of 750 people in 27 countries on 6 continents.
Wow. And
I know there's a lot more there. So, and that also aligns perfectly with my alignment to the UN global goals, quality education and gender equality. But it's widened a bit. So it's female entrepreneurs and basically underrepresented entrepreneurs of any other gender. So whether, they're Black or Asian or disabled or LGBTQ, anything basically that's not a straight white man, because the reality is there are 2 playing fields when it comes to raising equity. They're both hard, but the one that straight white men play on is relatively flat, and the one that everybody else plays on is very uneven. And that's kind of become my passion.
Superb. I love it. So watch this space.
Watch this space. We're relaunching our website shortly. It's called Funding Focus, funding-focus.com. And I would hope to have the website out late June, early July.
Okay.
And we're building from there. We're starting to launch some training programs. I'm in the middle of writing my 2nd book.
Superb.
Really
Great,
appreciate
great chat. Thanks, David.
today, David. Thank you very, very much, and best of luck with it all.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe and remember to follow us on social media for more content like this.